I've got to say that I think he was one of the greatest frontmen ever. He'd walk on stage and he'd just take your breath away, and he knew how to tantalize the audience. My son was the greatest rock and roll star in all the world. That's me, I always do that.
Well, the first time I ever met Philip, I was playing in a hall in Dublin. I had a local band, and during the intermission, I was standing in the toilet, and this guy sidled up to me beside me at the urinal, and he said, "How are you? I'm in a band too, called the Black Eagles, and I'm the chief Black Eagle, you know." And it was Philip, and he was about 15 years of age.
I'd come home and he'd say, "Ma'am, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'd love a guitar," he says. And I'd send him money, you know, to go towards the guitar.
A new band had started called Skid Row. Philip was the singer, and they were doing their first gig, and on the afternoon of the first gig, they wanted a loan of my bass drum and bass drum pedal. I said, well, I'll have to go with it. So I went with the bass drum and the bass pedal to the Club A Go-Go. And Philip's performance was absolutely amazing, and really, really amazing. I was totally taken with this performance.
Philip is about 18 now, and I went in this nightclub, and I hid behind a round bollard that was holding the roof up. And I hid behind that, and my friends, we were all hiding. And the next thing, Philip, they came out on stage, and all the girls started screaming, all the youngsters, right? And I'm going, what are they screaming for? You know, what's happening? And the next thing, he starts off, and it was him. Then I heard the music, and I went, wow, I thought he's bloody brilliant. And all of a sudden, I looked at one of my friends, and she said, he's feckin' brilliant.
I was with a show band called The Dreams, and they were paying me good money, and I was working 6 nights a week with them. And then I started thinking, this music's a load of crap, you know. I was playing like Simple Simons, put your hand in the air, you know. And I was thinking, how long can I keep this up? You know, like I want to start playing again, yeah. And I'd saved up a little bit of money, and it took me about 6 months to make up my mind eventually to leave the show band, and I did. And that's when I started going out to all the pubs and clubs on my own, asking all these musicians, did they know any bass players and drummers that would form a group with me?
It was a very kind of small, friendly scene around that time among musicians, and we used to hang out together a bit and eat in the same late night restaurants and meet up. And so Philip was, you know, a member of the beat group community as it was in those days, you know.
When Philip finished with Skid Row, he eventually formed a new band with Brian Downey called The Orphanage.
I was in a bar one night in Dublin. I met Eric Rickson. He was a keyboard player from Belfast, and he was in exactly the same position as me. And we ended up in this club called the Countdown Club. And the band that came on was Orphanage, and Phil Lynott was the singer, and Brian Downey was the drummer. And I went, who is this drummer? He just, you know, wow, I got to get him for my band. They took a break, and Philip and Bram went into the changing room, and I walked in and went, hello, I'm Eric Bell. I used to play with Dreams show band. And they're looking at me like, and I said, I was just wondering if you know any bass players and drummers, because I want to form a group. Philip came over to me and he said, we'll form a band with you. And Bran wasn't interested. Bran said, no, I think we should keep Orphanage. And Phil said, no, ma'am, we want to form a new group. You know, Orphanage has got boring. Why don't we form a band with Eric? And Bran said, yeah, okay. Anyway, it ended up that Eric Rickson joined the band as well. I hadn't the nerve to turn around to him and say, oh, I only want the three-piece group.
I was hanging out with Philip and Eric Bell and Eric Rickson and Brian, and I was working for this guy who had been managing Skid Row. In fact, he was still managing Skid Row at the time, and there was about 25 acts, and I used to book all the acts. So he owned the club as well, and it was called the Countdown Club. I arranged for this new band to start rehearsing there that had no name at that time, you know. And eventually, anyway, I was starting to book their gigs because Ollie was going to manage this guy. Ollie Byrne was going to manage the band. And then Philip said to me, look, you're doing all the work. Leave Ollie. Stop looking after all these 25 other bands and just manage us because we're going to happen.
Terry O'Neill, he was about 17 or something, but very on the case, and you know, a sort of a live wire, you know, full of energy and determination. And I think he spotted something in us, in the band right away, you know, that maybe nobody else did at the time.
When we were going to do our first gig, we still didn't have a name for the band. And it was becoming like, this is ridiculous, and we needed to get posters and all stuff like that. And we just went through so many names and we couldn't come up with a name. And all the time when we were trying to think of names, Eric would be going, I will and me tin Lizzy. Because that's what he used to say. He used to have these catchphrases all the time. So at one point anyway, I said, let's call the band Thin Lizzy. And Philip went, I know, we'll call it Thin Lizzy. T-H-I-N, because everybody in Dublin will say Tin Lizzy, because nobody can pronounce the T-H, like me, for instance. So that's how the name came about.
We were a four-piece band at that point, but I always wanted a three-piece. And one day we had a meeting and Terry instigated it. And he said, listen, I might be able to get you some gigs, but the money's not going to be great for a four-piece. But if you became a three-piece, there'd be more money around, and so on and so on.
And I said, I've got an idea. What we'll do is, Philip, you leave the band because we don't really need a bass player. And then everybody went. And I said, oh no, that's not going to work, right? So I'll tell you what we'll do. We don't really need a guitarist. What about if Eric Bell leaves the band? And everybody went, what's he talking about, you know? And then I said, no, I've got a better idea. Why don't we just do it without a drummer? If Brian Downey leaves the band. And then Eric Rickson said, I get it, I leave the band. And Eric left the band, in fact. And then we were able to survive, in fact. It worked out quite good, you know?
Yes, I was going over the Cork and Kerry mountains. I saw Captain Pharaoh and his money he was counting.
You couldn't get a better front man. Philip had no inhibitions once you put him on that stage, man. You know, he was performing, you know. Anybody in the house from Ireland, would you like a little bit more Irish in you? You know, that was Philip. He was an amazing performer.
And Philip would be dressed in a certain way, you know. And then you'd go and have a drink at about 5 o'clock or something like that. And at about 6 o'clock, Philip would go into the toilets and wherever we were, and come back out about 5 minutes later, dressed in completely different clothes, where he had his kind of day clothes, and his evening clothes. Now this is before he was anything like a star, but he was always like a star, if you know what I'm saying. He kind of personified what a star should be. He always looked at his best.
He was worse than a girl. If you went into a shop, if you went into a clothes shop with Philip, you were there for the day. He would come out and he'd go, "Eric, what do you think of this jacket?" And about half an hour later, "Do you think this one looks better?" And then he gets onto the trousers, and I mean, he was just, "I don't think this goes with that, and do you think the collar's too high?" And you know, he really very much into fashion.
Phil was just one of those type of people that was, he was a real sort of romantic. I mean, he was dark, he was handsome, he loved the sort of, the thrill of the chase, and he loved the sort of, the whole sort of edginess of the whole rock scene, you know, he loved that, he really did. He wasn't afraid to bend the rules.
It's pretty unusual, you know, I can't think beyond Hendrix and Lizzy of any other white band with a black lead singer. Certainly not at that time.
Philip was one of 3 black people that you'd see in Dublin. Outside of Dublin, you wouldn't really see black people. So when we went to play in Carlow, Kilkenny, even Cork, Galway, anywhere, as soon as we got out of the van and went into a pub or a restaurant, people would go, "Oh, there's a black guy." And I know this sounds mad, and it's not that long ago, but that's the way it was, you know.
The first album was, it was a very big surprise to us because how it came about was a guy came over from Decca Records from London to see some talent in Dublin. And one of the people he wanted to see was a singer called Ditch Cassidy, who was a good friend of ours. He was a soul singer, very good showman. And Ditch hadn't got a band that week to back him, so he got Thin Lizzy, myself, Philip and Brian, to back him. So we backed Ditch with a few soul songs, and we stood in the background. And the guy from Decca watched this in an empty ballroom in Dublin. And afterwards, Ditch disappeared somewhere, and he asked us, did we want to record an album in London? Just like that. We had to get the tube train about 8 o'clock every morning for about 2 weeks to get to this studio in West Hampstead where we recorded the first album, and we were extremely stoned. There was so much smoke in the studio I couldn't see Philip or Brian at all, and a lot of it was ad-libbed right on the spot.
He wrote a song called Dublin, another one called Dee Levine, and there's loads of them from that period. And they're beautifully written. They're as fine as anything. I mean, I'm a great fan of Paddy Kavanagh and Seamus Heaney and all the great Irish poets. And you could take out about 2 or 3 of his and you could say they're nearly there. If he crafted them a bit more, they would be there. They're that good. You know what I mean?
Philip used to describe it, he said it's a very warm album. It sounds very mellow, very warm type of feel off it, which I think is true. And I think there's some very clever stuff on it. I don't think I could ever play the guitar work that I played on the track Remembering. I don't think I could ever play it again, you know, because a lot of it was just made up on the spot.
Eric Bell is one of the best players I've ever heard in my life. He's the most mental idiot. When he starts playing the guitar, he goes off and is shit. I don't know what he's talking about when he goes, yeah.
Eric Bell, I loved as a guitarist. I thought he had a totally unique sound that Edge in U2 has taken a stage further. This sort of ringing guitar, you know, it's beautiful. Like Chuck Berry had it too, you know, and it's a beautiful way of playing it. I can't think of anybody doing it right now. It's beautiful play, and I loved what he added to the group.
We finished the first album and then we were brought back to Ireland and we lived there as usual and did a few more gigs, and the album was released, and a lot of our fans bought it, but it was pretty hard to get. And I remember Philip used to be going down to the record shops personally to see if it was in the shops, and it wasn't, and he would phone up Decca and really give them a bollocking and say, like, what's the friggin' point of having the album if it's not available, you know?
The only people who got who got any kind of recognition and went up that other step were people who'd actually left Ireland, like Rory Gallagher and Granny's Intentions, who were a band that were around the the early 70s. So until Lizzy went away, they couldn't really go up that extra rung in the ladder.
So our management said, I think we need to go somewhere else now. So we ended up living in England. But the funny thing about it was, no one knew who we were. So we were coming from Ireland, #1, and then we came to England, and it was like, thinno, you know, no one knew who we were. So we had to start all over again from the very bottom.
There was one concert he did. He came to Manchester, and Susie Quattro was on first. Then Lizzy was on second, and the lead band, the Stars, was called Slade. I'm backstage with Philip, and all of a sudden I see Susie Quattro, and she run past Philip's dressing room. She's crying. They booed her off the stage by screaming, I'm Slade. They wouldn't listen. So Philip looked at me and he went, oh, Jesus, you know. So out he goes. And I go back to my seat, and he walks on stage, and he went, they started booing, get off, black arse, get back to Africa. So I jumped up and I ran over to the young fella that said that, and I started to throttle him. I did, listen, I had to be pulled off the young fella. This is the truth. And the next thing was Philip went, he got the mic and he went, give us a chance. And somehow or other, they listened, but not attentively as Philip would have liked.
We were on the road permanently to try and get the name Thin Lizzy into people's minds, yeah. And some nights we'd play for next to nothing, you know. Like the money we would go out for would be very, very little money compared to what we used to go for in Ireland. But it was to build the name of the band up.
Philip was amazing because he went up and down that M1, and like it's one of the things I always admired him for, that he could just keep doing it. The band were in debt, you know, things were hard, and like I was amazed that anybody could just do it. It was so hard because this wasn't in a coach or anything. This was in a transit van.
We used to rehearse once a week in this pub in London. This particular day we turned up as usual for a rehearsal, and we were trying different ideas and there was nothing working. So Philip started going up the microphone, playing rhythm and singing various songs like Seven Drunken Nights and Mary from Dunlow and all this type of Irish stuff. And at one point he got on to Whiskey in the Jar. So I started thinking, pick up the guitar, and I started playing along with him just as something to do, basically. The next minute the door opened and Ted Carroll walked in. He was one of our managers, Dublin man. And Ted goes, by the way, as he's setting up my amp, he's talking, what was that song you just stopped playing when I walked in the room? And Phil goes, what? Oh, I was only messing about. Ted, that was Whiskey in the Jar or something. He says, when's your next single to be with Decca? Oh, about 5 weeks. Have you got a song for it, for the single? And we said, oh yeah, Black Boys in the Corner. It's an original song. Have you got a B-side? No. Well, why don't you put Whiskey in the Jar on the B-side?
I took all of this money, and it was a pretty penny. I took all of this money, and I brought
about 5 weeks later, we went into the studio and we recorded Black Boys in the Corner. And then the guy said, "What are you going to put in the B-side?" And we said, "Whiskey in the Jar." And then we had a little sort of party at the Mix, and Gary American Dan and a few of our mates and so on and so on. And with a few drinks, and we played the 2 tracks, Black Boys in the Corner and Whiskey in the Jar. And everyone says, A-side, Whiskey in the Jar. And myself, Philip and Brand still said, "No man, we're serious musicians, you know. We want Black Boys in the Corner on the A-side." But we ended up, it was a double A-side.
Philip kind of played rock music, but with Irish melodies running through it, and people who knew Irish music could kind of recognise these melodies, and not necessarily, they're not in your face or anything like that, but there is an Irishness about his music.
And Philip was a black man in Dublin, you know, but he was very, very Dublin, very, very Irish, and he had those melodies seem to be in Philip, you know, because that melody goes through all of his work, which I think is inherent in Irish musicians, you know.
We had no real music identification. The Bachelors, I think, were a challenge to the Beatles, and they won because they grinned more. I think they had about 5 #1 hits in a row, but they weren't a rock band. Then Lizzy came along, and they were amazing, and they were rockers, and they were cool, and they gave us all a sense of identity almost.
Vagabonds of the Western World, it was like for me anyway, it was a turning point musically in the studios. We were all starting to take it all a bit more serious, yeah.
This is the original for the front cover of Black Rose. Still in the same wrapping, and you'll see it needs a bit of dusting. Myself and Philip knew each other to see. He was into Marvel Comics, I remember well, because I did the cover for Poetry magazine at the time, and I used the Silver Surfer icon, you know, stuff like that. So he said he wanted to work with me, and the first thing we did was Vagabonds of the Western World, very successful album for Thin Lizzy. It sort of put them on the map.
Like around this time, I started going a bit weird because of various things in my private life, and you know, any money I got, I would spend it on alcohol or cheap sherry, and I was smoking like dope like all day, and I started getting really sort of freaked out by everything.
Eric was very into himself and his music, which is entitled to be, same as I am into myself, my art. And he parted company with Lizzy, which I thought was a terrible shame.
One of these tracks, The Hero and the Madman, I remember that day we were recording that track. And I went out to do the solo of The Hero and the Madman, and I basically cracked up. I heard the lyrics, "Oh, are you the hero? Oh, are you the madman?" And I started, fuck me, this track's about me. Yeah. And I just something went click, something fused, you know, with the help of the Valium and the other stuff. And I said, wow, I gotta get out of here. And I just wanted out. I had enough, you know. That was me. Gone.
Philip was definitely influenced by Dwayne Allman and the Allman Brothers, because after Eric left the band, he got the twin guitar lineup, and I think that was pretty much modelled on the Allman Brothers sound. We were huge fans, all of us, of the Allman Brothers, Dwayne Allman in particular, you know. And I think that's when I mean, I know they were successful they had the minor success with Eric in the band, but I think that's when Philip really found this sound that was going to really do it for him, you know.
Stop for LA and Glamour. Brian Robertson brought aggravation and energy. There's no doubt about that, and enormous musical talent.
You know, the very first album, which, you know, I always say to people, I really like that album, right? And all the sort of like critics or whatever say, that's a weird album. And I go, yeah, it is a weird album, but that's why I like it. So Nightlife was a strange album, simply because the band had turned from, you know, the three-piece band with Eric, and then now it's a new band, and obviously record companies are going to want to, what are you doing? And we went from Barry White to, do you know what I mean? But having said that, I liked the Barry White shit we did, and I liked the kind of weird funk stuff we did. And I thought it had its place in where we were going to in the future.
He was very, very good at working on finding the right people, you know. And I think he did that obviously with Robbo and Scott and Brian Downey particularly. And then he could extract from those people what he needed to live into what it was.
I guess he kind of thought I was his younger brother and sort of looked after me and shit, and I actually felt that made me feel good. I didn't have anybody down there, you know. Do you know what I mean? I'd come all the way down from Glasgow to London, and he did look after me, and his mum looked after me, and cut.
My wild one.
He was able to work that twin guitar sound, have that little bit of Irish melody in there, and his own distinctive style. He had a way of delivering the song which worked incredibly well live and usually very, very well on record.
Philip was influenced by Celtic Christianity, Celtic monasticism, Celtic mysticism, Celtic spirituality, and that, you know, related to, I suppose, his upbringing, and he put a lot of that into his music, and it's there, you know. And I think you need more than just, you know, what's the word for it? Banal beliefs. You need something deeper to write good lyrics, you know.
I have to say that after Whiskey in the Jar, there'd be some of his stuff that would be really heavy. But then I'd get some lovely stuff like Dancing in the Moonlight and I Am Just a Cowboy, and every Emerald, some beautiful. I mean, his music it just took over. I'm one of his greatest fans.
I love Emerald. I think the lyrics are great. It sort of conjures up Phil's sort of romantic side. I think musically it has everything that was great about Thin Lizzy. It has the excitement, it has the depth, it has that sort of Celtic Irish rock feel, and it's definitely one of my favourite songs.
Down from the glen came the mighty men with their shields and their swords to fight the fight they believed to be right, overthrow the overlords. To the town where there was plenty, they brought plunder, sword and flame. When they left, the town was empty. Children would never play again.
It's technically a very difficult song to play, because you're playing stuff that is to do with rhythm from the drummer and rhythm from all the guitar players. And then you've got the harmony guitars coming up in the middle and all the rest of it. And if you're not together, you're not going to do it. Well, we did it around the world for years. And when we did it well, we did it real good.
With Whiskey in the Jar, obviously their whole thing, especially in Ireland, went up to star level. Maybe not so much in the rest of the world, where it was, it was a hit, but it wasn't it didn't make them superstars, if you like. But the boys are back in town. Obviously, they became superstars throughout the world.
With a reputation as one of England's top bands and an acknowledged big hit here, the boys are certainly back in town, and we've got them on Rock Concert.
Hated it. I mean, if anybody asks me, the boys are back now, it's like, no, please don't, okay? Because, it's on bloody bargain hunt now. How can you be on bargain hunt? And you go, I mean, and it's like, oh God, please let me out of this nightmare, because I've been locked into this nightmare, and it's like, this is not what it should be about, right? So please let me alone.
She'll be the baby.
Philip always made you work very hard, and he always brought the best out in you, you know. He was able to do it in a way without being hurtful to them, without putting them down in any way. He'd kind of compliment them and still get them to do more.
I didn't write a lot of songs for the band that were, you know, although I put so much into the other songs, which I should have been credited for, and I'm not going to pull any punches on that one. I should have been bloody well credited for it, but I wasn't, because I was just too young and stupid, I suppose.
You know, if you've got somebody next to you who comes up with great riffs that will lend themselves to that particular song, great, use that. If you're there with a brilliant drummer that can add fire to something like Emerald or, you know, Sha-la-la-la-la, just to make a song out of that, or Opium Trail, and you give those songs that kick like Brian Downey did, wow, you just got, it's like, you know, just like you're on a wave here, and it's like it being on a steam train. It's just not gonna, you know, it's like bang. You got all those great talents coming together, and it's just like.
My favourite album is Johnny the Fox. Simply because I thought we'd grown up a little bit by then, and I had, maybe the rest of them, they were already grown up because they were older than me, right? But I actually felt that I'd grown up a little bit by Johnny the Fox, and I felt that the solos that I played, the lead guitar that I played, even the riffs that I put down were more seminal.
One of the riffs that Robbo had was a riff in Don't Believe a Word, you know. That little dim, because originally Don't Believe a Word was a ballad. And then Phil liked that riff. So Phil took that riff and he added it to his ballad, and that became the fast version of Don't Believe a Word. But that was his great talent.
Everybody thinks the concept album, seriously. I'll give you an idea of the concept. Philip said to me, I need a record cover. And I said, what's the title? He said, I have no idea, do something. And you like, so I did this beautiful sort of Celtic metal border and left it blank in the middle because I figured last minute I can put bloody anything I like in there within a day or two. You know what I mean? Because before computers, you had to do everything by hand, you know. So I think my deadline was the Monday, and there I was on Sunday with nothing in the middle, and I said to Philip, you know, give me something to put in this. The record company is screaming at me, you know, and they kick my ass. And I'm telling him I haven't got a title. And he said, call it Johnny the Fox. I said, what's that about? And he said, I don't know, but I'm writing a song at the moment. So I said, Johnny the Fox, okay, and that was it. So I had to sit down and think of something. So I remember the Nightlife, I had this sort of big Jaguar overlooking the city. And I had the city in the background, the fox in the foreground. I thought, that's as good as it gets. But there's no song in the album called Johnny the Fox. There's one called Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Weed. And I said, that's not about me, is it? And he said, no, it's about some other guy, you know what
I mean? I had all Philip's memorabilia. Mine got burned down at the Asgard Hotel that I owned up in on the Hill of Howth, and so I just done it, and then when people come to the house I'd say, oh look, come and see my Philip, and it just gathered. Now when people come to the house they bring me all kinds of stuff. Look at this, a guy came from America, that's his license plate of his car. When he first started to make it big, when he decided to take me touring around America. And we arrived at the Hyatt Regency, and I'll never forget the doorman bowing to us as we walked in. And then we're shown up to our rooms, and the next thing our door opened and a fellow walked in, and he walked over to the side of the bed and he put something there, and then he walked around to the other side of the bed and he left something there, and then he bowed and he walked out. He'd left an ounce of marijuana on either side of our bed. Philip's room was adjoining ours. I ran into Philip, I went, "Philip, a man has just walked in and he's left this." "Oh, Jesus, man, he's left it in the wrong room."
He loved the sort of the thrill of the whole thing that Thin Lizzy had managed to get themselves into. You know, he just lived the whole life as you would expect, really. He'd got himself into a fantastic situation where he was, you know, sort of adored by all these people, and he sort of, you know, he played on it because because it was him, it was his life, you know.
And I always get chocolate stains on my hands. And my father is a born a priest. Says I'm living in a trance, and I'm dancing in the moonlight. It's happening in its spotlight. It's alright dancing in the moonlight. On this long, hot summer night.
Nobody spots an alcoholic within the music business because there's so much drink freely available, and the way tours work and so on, when you arrive at a gig, there's drink there and there's food there, and there's drink before the gig and there's drink after the gig and there's a party after the gig, and so there's always a lot of alcohol around. Obviously, from stories that we've heard, Philip had become very dependent on alcohol, and eventually had become very dependent on hard drugs, which is sad.
Now, I've read, you know, like in different British articles that you've done for music papers over there about how you felt you went through a lull period over, say, like a year or over that 2-year period a year ago. You know, I don't quite agree with that, and I'm sure many of the Australian audiences don't agree with that, because I thought that you maintained your own standard and maintained a chart position, whereas even through that whole new wave punk era, you know?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said it, but the thing was, I felt it in me writing. I felt I wasn't saying something, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I just didn't want to jump up on the stage and be angry.
Right.
For the sake of it, and so that's why I could never associate with the punk thing.
It's happening in its spotlight. It's alright dancing in the moonlight. On this long, hot summer day.
He was basically going to the situation of being Bruce Springsteen. Yeah, so that's where he was going, which is fair enough as a songwriter. That's fair enough, and that's good. But it wasn't kind of where I was going. I was going somewhere else. So I didn't really take on board, you know.
Solo in Soho is your solo album, and yet that's a very different Phil Lynott to the Phil Lynott, the lyricist and the songwriter in Thin Lizzy. Child's Lullaby, for instance.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sarah, that was on Thin Lizzy.
Sarah, yeah, well, that would, yeah, fair enough.
The thing is, though, it is the separation I've been looking for.
Right.
I want to try. I think one of the things that was holding up Thin Lizzy was that, because I wanted to get this sort of softer side of music out of the way, it was Lizzy had to put 2 or 3 slow songs on.
Right.
Whereas now, the minute I finished the solo album, I just wanted to put all the aggressive songs to Lizzy, you know?
I was working in a nightclub in Manchester where Phil used to go for a drink, and I was playing there with Bill Tarmy from Coronation Street, and a good friend of mine called Joe Leach, who was very close with Phil, gave me a phone call one day and said, "How would you like to go and play with Thin Lizzy?" And I wasn't really, I didn't really know about Thin Lizzy. I knew they just had The Boys Are Back in Town, and I knew they had Dancing in the Moonlight and Don't Believe a Word. So they'd had some big hits, really great hits. So I was going, yeah, this would be great. I'd love to go and play with Thin Lizzy. So I went down for an audition, and I was very lucky. I got on with Phil and Scott and Brian Downey and Snowy White, and it was great.
And how did you run into Snowy?
I seen him play in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And I liked his playing then.
Right, well, the reason I asked about Snowy is the fact that it just seemed so incredible at the start, when he was jamming with Pink Floyd, for you and the rest of the band to get so excited and invite him into the band, because it just, Pink Floyd and Thin Lizzy don't exactly, should we sit a couple over here?
Yeah.
Gel together, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the thing was, Pink Floyd, Snowy's been doing the gig with Pink Floyd for a couple of years. And it's like just a gig once every 2 years. As you know, Pink Floyd only play every 2 years. And he just wanted to be in something that was a little more raunchy.
Right.
And where he was his own man. And he was looking to join a band, whereas with Pink Floyd, he was just doing as he was told, sort of thing,
The reason I joined Thin Lizzy when they asked me to was because I thought they were a good band. And I liked their songs. I thought they wrote some really classic songs, and they had their own sound, recognisable style. And I thought, when I spoke to the guys, we discussed the fact that there should be a bit of space for me to do my thing, a bit more bluesy, whatever. So I joined with a sort of high hopes.
Listen, congratulations on the Chinatown album.
Cheers.
It's I've only just got it, and I played it all last night, and you must be very happy with it.
Yeah, I'm really pleased, and it's doing well in
Well, tell us about how it's going in England. It's already got a silver record, right?
Yeah, it's gone silver. It's not released yet,
right?
But it's gone silver.
And the single?
Top 10, so...
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Now listen, Chinatown, you must have had a few reservations about how successful it's going to be,
Yeah.
Considering all that's going on in England, the charts, etc.
No, I knew this was a good one.
Yeah?
Yeah, because Snowy's so good.
Chinatown was a bit strange because I'd been working with Pink Floyd right up until the day before we started work on Chinatown. I'd been in Los Angeles, and then I think we did a show, the Wall show in New York, and then the day after I flew back to London, and the day after that I was in the studio with Chinatown. So I knocked out a few riffs, which was the Chinatown riff was one of mine. And of course, because I was new and it was all fresh, it was good vibes. But even then, I started thinking, these guys are wasting a lot of time here. They're wasting a lot of time, and I don't know whether they realise it's their money they're wasting, but when I get in the studio, I like to work.
People sort of dismissed Chinatown for some reason. That was a pretty hot rockin' album, you know what I mean? It was a lot of unfortunate things happened with Chinatown. I always remember when Killer on the Loose was heading straight to #1, the record company ran out of product. They couldn't get it in the shops. So it went down to #10, and from then on went into freefall. But it was heading all the way up. And Killer on the Loose then got a lot of negative publicity because it was suggested it was written for Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. But the papers picked on it, the tabloids loved it, and that was it. There's a lot of good songs on that.
Now, Chinatown, it's back to, in some respects, back to Thin Lizzy of old, I feel. It's really raunchy. It's hitting you right between the eyes.
Yeah, a little lower.
Yeah.
But I think it is, definitely. It's got a lot of guts up. And I think what's really neat about Chinatown, a lot of people thought I might be going soft with the solo album and the kids and stuff. Chinatown dismisses that straight away because you can see the aggression.
My first album was Chinatown, and even then we've got little synth sounds creeping in on stuff like Killer on the Loose and Chinatown in particular, and then more so with Renegade. Then he was very kind enough to give me a feature on a track that him and Snowy had written, the track called Fats. But it was very nice of him to give me the opportunity to be involved in the writing, really, because he didn't have to do that.
There were a lot of tracks that I really enjoyed and that did work. I thought Renegade worked. The track Renegade, that worked well. I'm only talking about the ones I was involved with, but there were one or two. I can't think of their titles. There were one or two that I figured could have been a lot better if we'd have spent more time. But and Phil didn't turn up, you know. If he's not in the studio, what can you do? So much money and time wasted.
Snowy was a great player, a wonderful player, but Snowy brought another sort of side to Thin Lizzy, I think, that was a bit more putting the emphasis on the blues side of things. And looking back, I'm not sure if that was what the fans wanted. It wasn't particularly an issue between anybody in the band, it was just Snowy's style, and obviously Snowy had been with Pink Floyd, and Snowy's a fantastic musician in his own right. But at that point, I think Thin Lizzy probably were looking for something a bit more extrovert and a little bit more, you know, a bit more fiery.
I don't think I was really the right guy for the band because I wasn't a rocker. When I started playing the guitar, it was just because I wanted to play the guitar, and my only ambition was to earn a living playing the guitar. And I didn't really think about becoming sort of, you know, a rocker or a rock star or any sort of star really. And that band was sort of in that direction, so it wasn't really comfortable for me.
John was obviously the last guitarist before the band disbanded, and I think John was just a bit of came in with a bit of a kick. He had a bit of a very different dimension, obviously, from Snowy, and it just sort of added this whole sort of slightly edging towards heavy metal, really.
Chances on the outside, I'm looking really slow. Feel lucky on the inside. Bones don't summer and bones don't sweat. Running out of bigger money. Take a little money, nothing left to lose. I can make a heavy bell.
Well, touring was fantastic. We used to go out 8 or 9 months a year. You know, there are some bands that go out and do that, but they're very sort of careful how they approach it, and, you know, bed at 9 o'clock, no this, no that, no drinking, no this, nobody backstage. But Phil loved the lifestyle, as I said, you know, and Phil used to sort of live the dream.
After shows, they used to get him into a corner, all the party goers, and they'd shove him in a corner and they'd keep talking and talking just to be seen with the star of the show. And he'd look over and he'd see all the shy people on the other side of the room. And he'd say, he'd be there stuck with all the posers, right? And he said, I used to say, just a minute, I'm off to the John. And off he'd go, and when he'd come out of the John, he'd walk up to the shy crowd and he'd go, how's it going? And they'd nearly die that he'd walked up to them.
I just think that after a while, Phil became less of a musician and wanted to become more of a celebrity. And then he got into a bit of drink and drugs, and so you get the frustrations and you get the problems, and the management were very frustrated because it's difficult to work with somebody who's a bit unreliable and doesn't turn up when they say they're going to turn up.
When he finally did go on the hard drugs, when he finally went seriously on heroin, he denied it to everyone of his friends, including myself, who questioned him kind of rigorously about it, because I found burned tinfoil in his house one day when I was over in London with him. Obviously the marks where he was burning heroin, chasing the dragon and stuff like that. That was bad enough, you know. But he swore to me he wasn't using heroin, and you always believe Phil, he wasn't a liar, you know, but obviously heroin addicts turn into liars as well.
I would say to Philip, don't ever, ever take heavy drugs. and he'd say, "Ah, Matt, for God's sake, we've all tried everything."
The problem is when the figurehead is so important, and the figurehead goes in a funny direction or is difficult to work with, then the whole thing falls apart.
I have to say that later on in life, yeah, I did notice changes, but then the drugs and the drink changes us all, doesn't it? I mean, what can you do? I mean, I know now that he did become very arrogant and shout and bawl at people. Maybe they deserved to be shouted at, but you know.
Affected everything. Affected his music, affected his life, affected his relationships with his wife, with his children, with his friends, and it affected everything. It destroyed him.
I really thought he'll be okay. Philip will be okay, you know. He's a big-hearted, strong guy, you know. And unfortunately, he wasn't okay.
I watched Philip die a very hard death. His marriage had gone. His wife and him had been on the drugs, and the marriage had gone by the wayside. And the last words my son said to me, and I've told everybody, and I'll never forget them, as long as I live. He said, "Merciful Jesus, what have I done to you?" And that was the last thing Philip ever said to me. And when I see the sadness in his eyes, that he knew he'd wasted his life.
We were into longevity, I am, and he was, and we always sort of saw ourselves walking the beach, you know, two old guys sort of reminiscing about the good old days, blind lemon Lynott or whatever, you know, but it wasn't to be.
You know, I remember that day, the day of his funeral out in Sutton, and it was a very sad day, very sad. It was a sad day for Dublin because Philip was such a huge figure in Dublin, and he was very much loved in this city because he was a huge Irish character.
All these definitive attitudes towards Thin Lizzy, like this album is the only Thin Lizzy album. It ain't like that. Thin Lizzy, you know, it's an evolution from, I suppose, a fairly ballady kind of oriented, poetic, mystical, Celtic influenced pop group, rock group, into hard rock and roll, into really driving hard rock and roll, and then slowly Philip himself was getting mellower. I mean, if you think of the songs like Kathleen and Sarah, very beautiful songs to his daughters. He was evolving into something really interesting. I'd love to know where it would have gone.